The Pathologic 3 demo, Pathologic 3 Quarantine, is finally out and available to play. This is Pathologic's newest entry in the series, and it's drastically different gameplay-wise from anything we've seen previously. It's finally the Bachelor's turn on center stage, and he does not disappoint. Pathologic 3 presents us with an updated town on Gorkin, many new and some even confusing mechanics, and a story revolving around Daniil Dankovsky's constantly shifting mind. I was lucky enough to be given early access to the demo, and I've already spent way too much time in a game that can be casually beat in a few hours. And I can confidently say that despite all the changes to the pathologic formula, Icepick Lodge has again created something amazing. Today, I want to talk about my first impressions of the game, the new game mechanics, and everything I liked and disliked. Although, of course I am a huge fan of everything we've seen so far of Pathologic 3, I will try to provide some fair critique of game mechanics and design choices when relevant. Okay, here's your disclaimer before we get into the meat and bones of this video. First of all, this is your spoiler warning. This is mostly a review on game mechanics and not the story as a whole, but I will be following along with the story as it introduces things I want to talk about. So if you care about spoilers of any kind, now's your time to go play Quarantine and come back in a few hours. Okay, second of all, as the main menu makes clear, the game's UI, as well as a few other things, are a work in progress, and may not reflect the final release of the game. If you have any suggestions or feedback, now's the time to share them. The end of the demo prompts us to fill out a survey about the game and its mechanics, so if you want Pathologic 3 to be the best game it can be, I urge you to fill it out. With that being said, here are my thoughts about Pathologic 3 Quarantine. First of all, we need to talk about the technical things. I've heard reports of the game running poorly and crashing constantly, which I haven't experienced personally, but it's still worth mentioning. The worst I've experienced is a frame rate drop when exiting this specific house, which always clears up in a few seconds. If you did run into any performance issues, or think you might, the game offers a lot in graphical settings that can be tweaked to better suit your setup. Something I did take issue with is the game's lack of subtitles. Sure, when you're in dialogue, you can always read out the entire conversation, but every time you talk to someone, they verbally say a line or two, and Daniil is constantly talking and whispering to himself, which can be hard to understand without subtitles for casual dialogue like this. I'm sure full subtitles will be in the full release, it just would have been nice to have it here. A welcome addition to the game's settings is Streamer Mode, which is automatically turned on for everyone. This setting simply censors nudity, which I greatly appreciate, as I would have to go entire playthroughs in Pathologic 2 without looking in the direction of a certain topless herb bride by Lara's house. But those days are no more. The last thing I would have had to complain about is the control menu not actually listing all of the game's controls. But this has actually already been fixed. In fact, by the time this video is out, Quarantine will have received a handful of bug fixes and even a balancing update. So any other issues people may have had might have been resolved. Alright, let's actually get into the game now. Quarantine opens with the Bachelor back home in the capital in a worst-case scenario situation. He's already lived through his 12 days in hell, and he's returned empty-handed, exhausted, and broken. Here he stands face to face with his life's greatest opponent, and we're introduced to one of Pathologic 3's many new features. Press Q to see that which is worthy of your attention. The Bachelor is now equipped with the power to think. Daniil can focus his attention on objects or people of importance to show us his inner thoughts. Pressing Q constantly at interesting things can take some getting used to, but once you get the hang of it, you'll find the Bachelor has things to say about everything. Getting to see what the Bachelor thinks about everything and everyone is just a cool way to better understand him, and it doubles as a world-building device as well. But the Bachelor's ability to form thoughts doesn't end there. Pressing Q to see thoughts is only half of this mechanic. It will also often be used as a sort of detective vision, similar to the Batman Arkham games. When focusing, different people and objects will glow different colors. Anything surrounded in a white outline simply means that the Bachelor has something to think about it, while a green outline mainly means something is interactable. This could be anything from an available conversation, to a lootable object, or even a smashable mirror or kickable trash can. This detective vision also serves as a tool to help the player reorient themselves. You'll find the Bachelor's internal dialogue literally plastered all over the town's buildings and even the very ground you walk on. If you ever forget what your objective is, just look at the walls and you'll find a recap of what you need to do. Oh, and if you ever get lost, look at the ground. This ominous trail of handprints, bloodstains, and scratches will lead you to your current objective. It's a really neat and unobtrusive way of helping people keep track of things, which I imagine will be especially helpful to newcomers. For now, that's it for the Bachelor's neuron activation. We'll see a bit more of it later on, but let's get back to the capital. What was so worthy of Daniil's attention anyway? Oh, of course, a diss at his life's greatest op. Go to hell, Death. Anyway, one runaway wheel later, and we're thrown out into the steppe, where we get to see this beautiful monstrosity. Say hello to the Shabnak, a deer. According to kin superstition, the Shabnak is a demon made of clay and bone, sent to spread the sand plague. To the Bachelor, the Shabnak is his own understanding of the legend, as well as a mix of his trauma from witnessing an herb bride being burned at the stake upon his arrival to the town, which results in the sand pest personified. While we have seen previous personifications of the plague, I'd wager that the Shabnak just might be the best take on this role yet. Not only does the Shabnak's design look sick as fuck, which, just look at its animations of being hurt by fire. She lets out a blood-curdling scream before crumbling, then jumping away like a spider. She's also the deadliest this role has ever been, since she can straight up kill you in a terrifying death scene, where she lifts you up above her and slams you into the ground. And she isn't just a physical threat either. Toward the end of the demo, we see her take a human form in order to taunt Daniil, just like our previous plague iterations. Now I do admit I may be hyping her up a bit much. We see very little of her in quarantine as a whole, so how exactly she'll play is still up in the air. As we've seen in trailers, she will occasionally be present in plague districts, assuming that this isn't some kind of scripted scene. Nonetheless, the Shabnak is very cool, and I can't wait to see more of her. Once the Bachelor's done being thrown around by the Shabnak, we're sent back in time to before the Bachelor left for the steppe town. Back at the Thanatica, we're formally introduced to fellow colleagues and friends of the Bachelor, Seraphima and Platon. You've already seen the Shabnak, but Ice Piccolage outdid themselves with every new character. Currently, some officers are here to put an end to the Bachelor's lab and bring in Daniil. As a last-effort Hail Mary, Seraphima and Platon place their full faith in Daniil and encourage him to leave to investigate an immortal man, while they remain behind and stall the powers that be as much as they possibly can. Before saying goodbye, Seraphima makes sure Daniil is safe and armed, and Platon figures he may as well get some work done and gives him the prototype for field testing. In the few short moments we spend with these two, they certainly leave a strong impression, and I hope we get to see way more of them in the full release. Alright, what do we have next to talk about?
I'm Daniil Dankovsky, Bachelor of Medicine. My research into the limits of human life has brought me renown. I've devoted all my energy and remarkable intellect to combating the greatest fear that binds humanity, the inevitability of imminent death. Seeking proof of my theories, I traveled to a small, steep town to examine a person of phenomenal longevity, Simon Kane. But I walked into a trap. The moment I arrived there, an unknown disease struck the town. It devoured the town like a wildfire. Its contagion and lethality surpassed anything humanity had ever faced. And I became the only doctor standing in the way of this unprecedented pestilence.
Well, that was, jarring. I'm sure this whole info dump is just a thing in the demo for new players to better understand the story, but wow was it handled weirdly, with this abrupt fade to black then the Bachelor's new voice actor reading off exposition. Speaking of, Daniil currently has a temporary voice actor since Ice Piccolage were having trouble contacting his original voice actor. Hopefully we'll see the Bachelor return for the full release, but our new Bachelor isn't terrible, honestly. This cold open is just a really bad first impression.
Seeking proof of my theories, I traveled to a small, steep town to examine a person of phenomenal longevity.
The Bachelor is a very vocal protagonist, and we constantly hear him throughout the demo, which gives this voice plenty of time to grow on you.
It was quiet in Thanatica. Tired of this noise. I'd rather not hear this. I forgot that there's so much of the world, as if things are animated.
This may not be the Bachelor we're familiar with, but it's still a good Bachelor. Next, adding to our roster of new characters is the Inspector, who after the Bachelor's steppe expedition is accusing him of his crimes and questioning him about it all. I feel like there's a lot more to this character that we're going to see in the full game, so this is someone you don't want to forget. For the first time when talking to the Inspector here, we get our perspective switched mid-conversation. Sometimes when in dialogue, our point of view will switch from the Bachelor to whoever we're speaking with, and we'll speak as that person to Daniil for a while. It's super cool and interesting to switch over and speak to our protagonist from an outside perspective. And we also get to physically see the Bachelor, which would also be super cool if only he didn't look so weird. I can't quite put my finger on what exactly the issue is, but the Bachelor just looks off, and he's not the only one. Later on, when we see the Haruspecs, he looks just as good as he ever does, but in dialogue, he somehow looks different. Quarantine has some beautiful looking characters, but it also has this. I think it may just be the lighting and shadows being different on their faces somehow, but for now we have Goblin Bachelor and Shad Haruspecs. Following the interrogation, we get to finally actually be in the town, but before we go on, I just want to take a moment to mention the game's music. Each entry in the Pathologic series has some iconic soundtracks, and although we only get a fraction of the full game's music, Quarantine definitely follows in their footsteps. For the past few minutes, you've been listening to my favorite track, the Interrogation Tango, which, as its name implies, plays during the Bachelor's interrogation with the Inspector. Another good song is the one that plays at the main menu, which just captures the Pathologic vibe perfectly. Another song I want to highlight is this peaceful, soothing music that plays when the Bachelor visits a patient's house. Finally, we're in our accursed town. Here, the Bachelor finds himself in the theater-turned-hospital, and we're introduced to another gameplay mechanic. Your apathy level is critical. Use inventory items that increase psychosis. Say hello to Pathologic 3's newest feature, Depression, and Insanity. The Apathy and Mania system serves as a kind of replacement to Artemis' survival meters. The bleak situation the Bachelor finds himself in causes his apathy to constantly increase, which you'll need to balance out by finding ways to tip the scale in the opposite direction towards mania. Really, you want to keep the meter in this sweet spot in the middle if you don't want to face any consequences. The Bachelor's mental state can be changed by a wide variety of things. As I already said, apathy is almost always increasing, and the easiest way to deal with this is by taking some drugs or having a smoke. Depending on what you use, you can send the Bachelor from depressed loser to complete demon in a matter of seconds, and the same goes for the other way around. Mania too high? Then drugs are your best friend. Although, you shouldn't rely too much on apathy or mania-inducing items, as there is a tolerance mechanic. Apparently, using too much of an item frequently will lessen its effects over time, but as the demo is quite short, we don't actually get to see this effect. Taking drugs isn't the only way of dealing with the Bachelor's mind. Plenty of the resources the Haruspecs survived off of have been converted into interactable stress-inducing and relieving items. Objects all over town, such as water pumps, trash cans, and playgrounds, can be used to decrease apathy and induce mania. While interacting with the environment is an accessible and renewable way to manage mental state, it's not exactly the fastest. If you find yourself out of drugs and needing to, say, use a water pump for example, you'll find yourself coming to a halt to stand still and stare at a slow animation play over and over again. And even the quicker mania inducers aren't much different, with you still needing to stand and wait. Depending on whatever shape your mental state is in, using the environment is just repetitive. Now that you know how to handle the apathy and mania system, you're probably wondering, well, why should I care? Well, if you intend to play this game at a reasonable pace, then staying in the safe zone should be very important to you. The more your apathy increases, the more the world slows down, and the Bachelor will move at turtle speeds. And hilariously, the opposite happens in Extreme Mania. Time will fly as Daniil moves at Mach speeds and turns into an absolute speed demon. As fun as this is, if you're not paying attention, this can lead to a swift death, as any level of mania drains health, and the higher your mania, the faster you'll die. So a high mania results in a quick death, but what does a maxed out apathy result in? Well, I'll just let you see along with my first impressions. How do I use it? Right click and then use? Oh, that went overboard. What did that do to me? I think I died. Holy shit! Daniil Dankovsky, no! Holy shit! I did too many drugs. Yeah, everything just gets to Daniil, and the hopelessness of the situation causes him to take his own life. Pretty brutal, but fitting for this game. Let's wrap up the mental state stuff so we can move on. I might have explained this mechanic to you well enough, but the game doesn't do that great of a job in my opinion. It could have just been me, but how exactly the system worked was incredibly confusing. And I didn't even fully begin to understand it until my second playthrough, after I dedicated some time to messing around with it. In the game's latest patch, Ice Pick Lodge included a few screens of tutorials for mental state, but I feel to new players looking at this is still going to be confusing. Actually, that latest patch fixed the other two issues I had with this system. On release, apathy increased a little too fast, and on top of that, in the UI, the meter and the outline were similar colors, which made it hard to notice when it was getting high. Fortunately, with Quarantine's latest patch, apathy has been tweaked and the UI has been updated. You now even have the option to test out a different HUD, but I'm more a fan of the original myself. Now, where were we? Here in the hospital, we've got some work to do. First of all, say hello to Yakov Little. Mr. Little will be providing Daniil assistance when it comes to hospital-related work, and through his eyes, the Bachelor tutorializes us on another mechanic, doctoring. Each day, a handful of plague-resistant patients will be brought to the hospital in hopes of making a temporary vaccine from them. In order to properly develop this vaccine, we'll need to correctly diagnose each patient and find their underlying conditions which results in their prolonged life. But doing so isn't so simple. In diagnosing someone, it's required that you interview them multiple times, thoroughly examine their body, and take notes on their symptoms. But you can't be too hasty when making decisions because patients may have ulterior motives, or might just be ignorant. They can purposefully lie to you about a symptom or just plainly not be able to explain something. This entire doctor-detective aspect is by far my favorite thing about Pathologic 3, and we're not even done covering it yet. The only thing that's worrying about this is how exactly this will play out on subsequent playthroughs or on revisiting days. Knowing exactly what's wrong with each patient can remove lots of playtime, so hopefully this is managed somehow. Speaking of lying patients, our final patient does just that, which leads the Bachelor into investigating his living environment so that we can find out the truth about his condition. In order to get to where this guy lives, we have to travel to town, which seems to be the biggest point of contention when it comes to new gameplay mechanics. Pathologic 3 does not have an open world similar to the first two games. Instead, you're confined to whichever district you're in, and at specific exit gates you can exit and fast travel to other districts. Selecting a district will have the Bachelor automatically travel along the map around closed gates and other quarantine districts to reach his destination. Upon passing through a dangerous district, you'll be forced to take the reins and safely navigate to the exit gate, where fast traveling becomes available again. I personally have no problem with this system, but I do understand why a lot of people don't like it. One thing I keep hearing is that people want to be able to freely explore the town, but I think this just might be a limitation of the demo. Highlighting a district will say closed and unavailable, so my hopes for the full release is that we can truly go anywhere, and the fast travel is just more akin to a loading screen. Although if it does work like this, I imagine going to a district without anything going on there would be pretty empty and bare. Something that did bother me is the fact that they switched the colors for burned and infected districts. On the map, infected districts now show as black, and burned districts are red, which I suppose does make some sense, since burned districts are covered in fire and plague districts are darker in color scheme, but I feel like this change was entirely unnecessary. On the way to our patient's house, we do pass through a plague district, so let's talk about how quarantine handles that. Navigating infected districts will require you to avoid a handful of dangerous obstacles and use the prototype effectively to guarantee your safety. As expected from a plague district, we have to avoid infected people wandering the streets, as well as plague hotspots. This is where the prototype comes in handy. In addition to clearing the immediate fog, the prototype will clear plague snares and plague whirlpools, which both slow you down. There's even a new type of danger to look out for. It's, these ghosts. What the deal is with these transparent, normal-looking people, I don't know, and it's never addressed. It's just something that's odd. Navigating plague districts aren't all that difficult, just as long as you pay attention to your surroundings. In fact, I'd say they're kind of underwhelming. All of these hazards only harm your health, so there's no threat of infection, and although the district looks the part, it's not actually that dangerous. Overall, I'd say plague districts are a little too easy and simple, and could really benefit from something else. I think maybe it could use some additional incentives to stick around and risk your safety. There is a gun to be found here, but in the demo, a second revolver is useless. Near the exit is a supply crate with medicine, so maybe a few of these hidden around would be enough. And also, there's still the Shabnak who we see in plague districts in the trailers, but not here. Maybe once she's actually present here, things will really ramp up. Moving on to Dankovsky's house call, here we get to see the final part of investigating and diagnosing patients. In order to find out what ails our patient, Dankovsky will have to question friends, neighbors, family, or roommates. Basically, anyone who might know anything pertaining to our case. We also need to use our detective vision again to find notable things in the environment, such as how clean the area is, any medicine the subject took, and any other evidence of sickness. I already said this, but the entire investigating and doctoring part of Pathologic 3 is just the best. So all of this was a blast for me, but this doesn't come without some concerns. Just like with dealing with patients in the hospital, there's the question of how this will be handled on repeating days or replaying the game. But a much more prevalent issue here is how the demo handles the investigation. Quarantine prevents you from continuing the story until you fully examined everything in the patient's room and asked every question there is to ask. If you didn't notice this mousetrap on the floor or realize there's two individual food items to examine on the table, then you're stuck here. Even if you were able to figure out the patient's diagnosis with all the other evidence you've already found, you still can't leave. I'm hoping this is the situation just because this is a demo and a tutorial, but if house calls always work like this in the full release, then wasting time with a pointless scavenger hunt is going to be very annoying. Once we finish up with our patient, the Bachelor retires to the Stillwater, and on our journey there, we get to see a burned district. My first impressions of this was that this place feels like literal hell. That is to say, burned districts were handled incredibly well. Just the atmosphere alone is enough to make this district feel intimidating. Constant gut-wrenching screams and dreary music alongside burning fires everywhere and evidence of chaos is just exactly what I would want from a chaotic, rioting district filled with bandits. Speaking of the bandits, they now run at you at full speed, and if your apathy is too high, they can even outrun you and catch up. Of course, to protect ourselves, the Bachelor is armed with a revolver, and a simple bullet can dispatch these guys. But he can also just aim his gun to momentarily stop and intimidate his attackers. Just like the Plague District, it's possible to get through this quickly and easily, but I feel that there's a valid sense of urgency. You can really feel the danger here, and lingering for too long will be a quick death. Although both danger districts share some issues, burned districts just feel way better. And I think this is partly because quarantine gives you what you would expect from a rioting district, and it even turns it up a notch or two. But with the infected districts, there's no real threat of infection. And sure, the district is way more open, but there's no real point of not sticking to the road. So here's my ruling on danger districts. Burned districts? Intimidating, hellish, I loved it. Infected districts? The atmosphere is certainly there, but it just feels underwhelming. Next at the Stillwater, the Bachelor begins his nightly routine of sorting his thoughts by relaying them to Eva. Eva is the first, living bound member we see in quarantine, and here she is absolutely stunning. The peacefulness of the Stillwater and Eva's calming demeanor set the scene perfectly. Already I feel she's outperforming her Pathologic 2 counterpart, which of course is to be expected from a Bachelor route. Besides for Eva, we do get Sticky and Con appearances, but surprisingly, Mark was completely absent, and so were the rest of the Bound. I never expected to see the entire Pathologic cast in a demo, but I was sure Mark would show up. In fact, there's no obvious references to theater or anything meta, which isn't a bad thing, it's just unexpected. Upstairs in Daniil's bedroom is the emergency command desk, which we can use to play with the last of the new mechanics we get to see in the demo. At this desk, the Bachelor can make up to 3 decrees each day. These range from things such as declaring quarantines, testing vaccines, and rationing supplies. Each of these decrees come with some kind of benefit and drawback, which affects the town's survival as a whole and the unrest of its population. We don't really get to see the results of these decrees, but we do get to see an exaggerated outcome of one. The Bachelor, having previously enacted a quarantine, causes a mob to form outside the Stillwater, and reversing it causes the plague to further spread. The decree system seems really intriguing. I just wish we could see more of how it really affects the town and plays out in real time. The Stillwater sequence ends with Daniil peering into a clock as we're given the choice to time travel to any previous day. This time travel ability and non-linearity of the game is supposed to play a major part in the full release, but as soon as you choose a day, the demo unfortunately ends. So, how exactly this will work is still unknown to us. Well, actually, Quarantine does reveal partly how it works, but what we get is not explained that well, which I suppose is understandable since we don't actually get to play around with this. You may have noticed on the left side of the apathy meter, there's a circle with a shard of broken glass in it. Well, this is our amalgam, basically time travel currency. I didn't mention it earlier, but in plague districts, the Bachelor can use painkillers to euthanize infected people in order to steal their time. That's a crazy sentence, right? Anyway, doing this will increase amalgam, which we can use to traverse time. There's probably a lot more to this system, but again it's poorly explained, and we don't actually get to play with it. This entire system is just another thing we'll have to wait for to see how it'll truly work. In fact, amalgam and time traveling aren't the only mechanics we're gonna have to wait for. Present in both the hospital and the Stillwater are tables with devices currently unavailable to use. In the hospital is a broken microscope that we see in action in the trailers. and the Stillwater has a desk which would have us charge and possibly modify the prototype. There's also a station for mixing medicine and analyzing items. I'm really interested in seeing how all of these stations could affect Hospital and Plague District gameplay, but all we get here is just their existence. With that, we've officially reached the end of Pathologic 3 Quarantine, and I've said just about everything I wanted to. Overall, everything is really good and things look promising. There are some things that need working out, but I'm confident Icepick Lodge is more than capable of handling it. We have a lot to look forward to when the game fully comes out. So for my review on the demo, I give Pathologic 3 Quarantine a
The worst is yet to come.
out of 10. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.